They changed their names, invented aristocratic bloodlines, and some even made their own mothers disappear. These weren't small white lies. They were elaborate deceptions that lasted entire lifetimes. Join us as we reveal the true stories of 19 Golden Age actors who faked everything to become Hollywood royalty. Cary Grant. Before Cary Grant became Hollywood's epitome of charm, he was Archibald Leach, a working-class boy from Bristol, England, with a thick accent and a past he'd rather forget. Born in 1904, Leach's early years were marked by hardship. His father placed his mother in a mental institution when he was around 9 years old and told young Archie she had simply gone away. He wouldn't discover the truth until his late 20s. This childhood trauma would haunt Grant throughout his life. The abandonment by his mother, whom he believed had simply left him, created deep psychological wounds. Decades later, Grant would turn to therapy in the 1950s and 1960s, desperate to confront his personal demons. In therapeutic sessions, he spoke of feeling fundamentally unlovable. Stemming from his mother's disappearance, the suave, confident persona he projected on screen was, in many ways, everything he felt he wasn't inside. He'd begun reinventing himself at 14. He forged his father's signature to join an acrobatic troupe touring the United States, never looking back. But when Hollywood beckoned, Archibald Leach didn't fit the mold of a leading man, so he became someone who did. Cary Grant. He trained his voice to adopt a transatlantic accent, smoothing out his Bristolian inflections until his origins became ambiguous. Some reports suggest he even claimed American birth, a strategic move to sidestep the era's anti-British sentiment in Hollywood. But the reinvention went beyond his voice. Grant cultivated an aura of effortless sophistication, maintaining a perpetual suntan to avoid studio makeup and dressing with impeccable aristocratic style. In reality, he had left school at 14 and grown up in modest circumstances. Still, the illusion worked. By the 1940s, he was one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. Yet behind the scenes, he wrestled with the weight of his own creation. "Everybody would like to be Cary Grant," he once said. So would I. It was a rare admission that the persona he crafted had become a role he could never quite escape. Even as he aged out of leading roles, he hesitated to let go of the image. In 1953, he considered retiring, worried that the rise of method actors like Marlon Brando would render his polished style obsolete. But he returned for Hitchcock's To Catch a Thief in 1955, proving he still possessed the effortless charm audiences craved. Despite the carefully constructed facade, Grant's past never fully disappeared. In 2020, a blue plaque was unveiled at his childhood home in Bristol, acknowledging the boy who once lived there before becoming Cary Grant. It served as a reminder that behind the Hollywood legend was someone who spent his life playing a role he could never quite leave behind. Merle Oberon. Merle Oberon possessed the beauty, the talent, and the screen presence Hollywood craved in the 1930s. But there was one thing she didn't have: the right ancestry, at least by Hollywood standards. Born Estelle Merle O'Brien Thompson in Bombay, British India in 1911, Oberon was of mixed Anglo-Indian descent. But to the world, she was a glamorous British aristocrat from Tasmania. That lie wasn't just a career move, it was a survival tactic. In an era when leading ladies couldn't be anything but white, Hollywood executives knew the stakes. They advised Oberon to erase her Indian heritage completely. To sell the illusion, she fabricated an upper-class Tasmanian childhood, claiming she had been born in Hobart before moving to England. In a 1934 interview, she doubled down on the lie, even dismissing distant Australian relatives as mistaken. But the truth was far from aristocratic. Oberon grew up in poverty in Kolkata, raised by her mother, Constance Selby, who was of Tamil and Maui descent. What made this deception even more painful was that Constance wasn't actually her mother. She was her grandmother, though Oberon may never have learned this truth. The woman she believed to be her half-sister was actually her mother, adding another layer of family secrets to her already complex identity. When Oberon left for England at 17, Constance came along, but not as her mother. To maintain the deception, she traveled under the guise of being Oberon's maid. In public, Oberon spoke to her only in Hindi, ensuring no one would suspect their true relationship. The psychological toll of living this double life was immense. Oberon existed in constant fear of discovery, turning down roles and opportunities that might expose her background. She lived as a fugitive from her own heritage, and the stress manifested in mysterious illnesses that sometimes hospitalized her. On screen, Oberon's transformation was just as meticulous. Cinematographers used strategically placed lighting and heavy makeup to make her appear more European. She even avoided direct sunlight to maintain a paler complexion. And it worked. By the mid-1930s, she was starring opposite Hollywood's biggest names, earning an Oscar nomination for The Dark Angel in 1935 and later playing Kathy in Wuthering Heights in 1939. But maintaining the lie wasn't easy. In 1965, when journalists began questioning her Tasmanian origins, she abruptly canceled a planned visit to the island. Some reports suggest she was so shaken by the scrutiny that she avoided Australia altogether for years. Yet even then, she never fully acknowledged the truth. It wasn't until after she passed away in 1979 that researchers uncovered her birth records in British archives, confirming her Indian origins. The revelation shocked fans and historians alike. How could one of Hollywood's brightest stars have hidden such a fundamental part of her identity? Oberon's story serves as a stark reminder of the racial barriers in early Hollywood. She wasn't the only star who altered their backstory to fit the mold, but her case was one of the most extreme. Today, as Hollywood reckons with its past and celebrates more diverse talent, her legacy remains complicated, a symbol of the extraordinary lengths some had to go to in order to succeed. Tony Curtis. In 1948, a 23-year-old Bernard Schwartz stepped off a bus in Hollywood with a dream and a name that casting directors deemed too ethnic for a leading man. Born in Manhattan's East Harlem, but raised in the Bronx, Curtis knew that transformation would be essential to his success. So he became Tony Curtis, borrowing inspiration from the novel Anthony Adverse and tweaking his mother's surname Kurtz into something smoother. Curtis's childhood was marked by poverty and instability. His Hungarian Jewish immigrant parents struggled to make ends meet during the Great Depression. His father, Emmanuel, worked as a tailor but was often absent, leaving young Bernard to help care for his younger brothers. The family faced anti-Semitic discrimination, and Curtis later spoke of feeling ashamed of his background, a shame that Hollywood both exploited and reinforced when they encouraged him to hide his Jewish heritage. But the reinvention didn't stop there. Curtis took speech lessons to soften his thick Bronx accent, replacing his streetwise cadence with the polished drawl of a matinee idol. Universal International, the studio that signed him, encouraged him to downplay his Jewish heritage, pushing him toward a more marketable image. While he never outright claimed aristocratic European roots, he carefully avoided discussing his immigrant upbringing, letting the public imagine a more refined past. By the early 1950s, Curtis was a rising star, flashing his good looks in swashbuckling adventures and romantic dramas. But when Sweet Smell of Success hit theaters in 1957, critics finally saw him as more than just a pretty face. Decades later, Curtis openly discussed the industry's pressure to conform. "I had to hide who I was," he admitted in interviews. By then, the Bronx Kid had already rewritten his own Hollywood story. Joan Crawford, Lucille Fay LeSueur, never existed in Hollywood. By the time MGM introduced her to the world in the mid-1920s, she was already Joan Crawford, a name she reportedly loathed, comparing it to seafood. But a new name was just the beginning. Crawford didn't just tweak her past, she buried it completely. She spun tales of privileged upbringing, claiming elite schools and wealth. In reality, she was likely born in 1906 in San Antonio, Texas, and grew up in hardship. Her childhood was marked by instability and alleged abuse. Her stepfather, Henry Casson, ran a theater, which sparked her love for performance. But Christina Crawford's later memoir, Mommy Dearest, suggested that Joan's own traumatic childhood may have shaped her troubled relationship with motherhood. The cycle of alleged abuse, from her own experiences to what her daughter claimed she inflicted, created a dark legacy that haunted her even after she passed away. After her mother's divorce, she worked as a lairess and waitress to survive. But Hollywood had no room for struggle in its fairy tales. Crawford obscured her past, allegedly falsifying high school records to gain entry to Stevens College. She never graduated. But by then, she had set her sights on something bigger, reinventing herself into a screen goddess. The desperation behind Crawford's reinvention was profound. Friends later recalled her obsessive need for control and perfection, possibly stemming from the powerlessness she felt as a child. Her famous wire hanger tantrum, immortalized in Mommy Dearest, may have reflected the rigid discipline she imposed on herself to maintain her Hollywood facade. Off-screen, she maintained an air of sophistication, always poised, always in control. But cracks in the illusion appeared over time. 4 tumultuous marriages, a notorious feud with B. Davis and later her daughter Christina's explosive memoir, Mommy Dearest, which painted Crawford as anything but the glamorous icon she had fought to become. Despite the contradictions, the deception, and the whispers of a past she refused to acknowledge, Crawford remained one of Hollywood's most enduring stars. In an era where image was everything, she proved that sometimes the truth was just another role to rewrite. Rock Hudson. In 1947, a towering young man from Illinois rolled into Hollywood with big dreams and a name that casting agents stumbled over. Roy Harold Schur Jr. didn't exactly scream matinee idol. So his agent Henry Wilson crafted a new identity, Rock Hudson. The name was pure marketing genius, evoking both unshakable strength and sweeping grandeur. But the makeover went beyond a catchy name. Studios spun a backstory painting Hudson as a rugged Midwesterner, someone who had grown up fixing cars and working various jobs. In reality, he had been a shy, awkward kid who struggled in school and worked various blue-collar jobs before catching his big break. Though his father was an auto mechanic rather than Hudson himself having any particular mechanical background, then came the industry's biggest cover-up. Hollywood had strict, unwritten rules about its leading men, and Hudson's personal life didn't fit the mold. In 1955, just as Confidential magazine was reportedly threatening to expose secrets about various Hollywood stars, Hudson suddenly married his agent secretary, Phyllis Gates. The timing was notable, and while some biographers suggest the marriage was a strategic move, the exact relationship between the magazine's threats and Hudson's decision to marry remains a matter of speculation. Gates later insisted she had no idea about Hudson's true orientation. The whispers in Hollywood circles suggested otherwise. For decades, Hudson played the part carefully, guarding his private life while Hollywood sold the fantasy of an all-American heartthrob. But in 1984, the illusion shattered. His AIDS diagnosis forced the industry and the public to confront the reality behind the Hollywood facade. When he passed away the following year, he became an unwitting catalyst for change, pushing the conversation about secrecy, identity, and acceptance into the spotlight. Rita Hayworth. Hollywood in the 1930s had a rigid formula for stardom, and for Margarita Carmen Canino, that formula didn't include a Spanish last name or Spanish identity at all. Born in Brooklyn in 1918 to a Spanish flamenco dancer father and an Irish-English mother, young Rita Hayworth was a natural performer. But when she arrived in Hollywood, her heritage became a liability. Studio executives at Columbia Pictures saw potential in her beauty, but believed she needed a more all-American look to land leading roles. The transformation wasn't immediate. It took years. First, her mother, Volga Hayworth, oversaw a painful electrolysis procedure to raise her daughter's hairline, a process that involved burning away sections of hair follicles to give her a higher forehead, more in line with Anglo beauty standards. Then the studio encouraged her to dye her naturally dark hair a striking red, and adopt a new last name, Hayworth. By the late 1930s, Margarita Canino had become Rita Hayworth, a carefully rebranded Hollywood starlet. But behind the glamorous pin-up posters and the media's love goddess moniker, Hayworth struggled with the identity she had been forced to erase. Men fell in love with Gilda, but they wake up with me, she famously said. In a 1946 interview referring to her most iconic role in the film Gilda, it was a rare glimpse into the disconnect between her public persona and the woman she truly was. Though she embraced her career, some speculate that Hayworth privately resented the sacrifices she made to fit Hollywood's mold. While she never explicitly denounced the changes, she later spoke about her Spanish heritage with pride, perhaps hinting at a longing for the identity she had been urged to conceal. In the 1960s, Hayworth began showing signs of what was initially misdiagnosed as alcoholism. Her behavior became erratic, her memory failing, leading to cruel whispers about her supposed drinking problem. It wasn't until 1980 that she was properly diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease. The glamorous love goddess spent her final years battling a cruel disease that robbed her of the very identity she had worked so hard to create. Unable to remember the woman she had become or the one she had once been. Her story remains a striking example of the industry's obsession with conformity a reminder of the price of fame in an era that demanded its stars fit a very specific image. Clark Gable wasn't born into Hollywood royalty. He built his throne brick by brick, but ask him about his past and you'd hear tales of sophistication that didn't quite match reality. The King of Hollywood carefully crafted an image of effortless elegance. Though truth be told, he was an oil driller's son from Cadiz, Ohio, who spent his youth covered in grime and sweat, not silk and champagne. Born in 1901, Gable lost his mother when he was just an infant. His father, an oil driller, expected him to follow the same blue-collar path. And for a while he did, working in factories, oil fields, and even selling ties just to make ends meet. The family later moved to Hopedale, Ohio, where young Clark spent much of his childhood. But Gable had bigger ambitions. And he knew that to succeed in Hollywood, he couldn't sound like a rough neck from the Midwest. Enter Josephine Dillon, a theater coach who later became his first wife and completely transformed him. She paid for his dental work, coached him on posture, and most crucially, refined his speech through rigorous elocution lessons. Gable shed his working-class accent for the deep, commanding voice that would define his on-screen persona. By the time he landed his breakthrough role in The Painted Desert in 1931, the transformation was complete. MGM didn't just cast him, they sculpted him. The studio dressed him in tailored suits, ensured his rugged masculinity never veered into crudeness, and buried any trace of his working-class origins. In press materials, his past as a factory worker vanished, his struggles to break into Hollywood minimized. The studios wanted a star, not a struggling laborer who fought his way to fame. And Gable played the part flawlessly. But behind closed doors, he never fully abandoned his roots. Despite his larger-than-L life status, he preferred quiet nights on his ranch over lavish Hollywood parties. He'd chat with locals in rural Ohio, buy farm equipment, and reminisce about his early days. Even after becoming the face of Hollywood glamour, the oil driller's son never disappeared completely. He just learned to keep him hidden. Natalie Wood, the woman who would become America's sweetheart, was born Natalia Nikolaeva Zakhareno in 1938 to Russian immigrant parents who had fled the revolution. Her father, a carpenter named Nikolai, changed the family name to Girden shortly after her birth. But it was her ambitious mother, Maria, who orchestrated the transformation that would make her daughter a star. Maria Girden's determination bordered on obsession. She pushed young Natalia into acting at age 4, convinced her daughter was destined for greatness. The family changed their surname again when Natalia entered Hollywood, becoming the Woods, but the price of fame was steep. Natalia grew up speaking Russian at home while projecting an all-American image in public. The constant code switching between her authentic heritage and her manufactured persona created an identity crisis that would plague her throughout her life. Studios immediately saw potential in the dark-haired, dark-eyed child. But they also saw a problem. Her Russian heritage and exotic looks didn't fit the typical child star mold. So Hollywood did what it did best. It manufactured a new identity. Natalia Zakhareno became Natalie Wood, and her ethnic background was carefully obscured in favor of a more palatable American dream narrative. The psychological toll of this deception was immense. Wood remained fluent in Russian throughout her life, but rarely spoke it publicly. She wrestled with questions of authenticity, never quite sure which version of herself was real. The Russian girl from her family home or the Hollywood starlet the world adored, friends described her as someone always performing, even in private moments, as if she had forgotten how to simply be herself. From Miracle on 34th Street as a child to West Side Story and Splendor in the Grass as an adult, Wood embodied the American dream on screen. But behind the cameras, she struggled with the weight of her fabricated identity. Her marriages to fellow actors Robert Wagner and later Richard Gregson were marked by her ongoing search for authentic connection in a world built on illusion. Wood's tragic drowning in 1981 at age 43 remains shrouded in mystery, but those who knew her said she had never learned to swim despite spending her final evening on a yacht. Her Russian heritage, so carefully hidden during her career, was finally acknowledged at her funeral when prayers were said in both English and Russian. Wood's story represents the immigrant experience in Hollywood. The promise of reinvention coupled with the pain of erasure, she achieved the American dream but lost pieces of herself along the way. Dean Martin. Long before he epitomized cool pruning with a martini in hand, Dean Martin was Dino Paul Crescetti, the son of Italian immigrants in Steubenville, Ohio, born in 1917 to barber Gaetano Crocetti and Angela Barra. Young Dino grew up in a working-class Italian neighborhood where English was a second language. Martin's transformation from Dino to Dean wasn't just professional. It was a complete cultural reinvention. As a teenager, he dropped out of school and worked various jobs, including as a dealer in illegal gambling operations. His parents spoke limited English, and Dino himself didn't speak English fluently until his teens. The shame he felt about his background was profound. He later admitted he was embarrassed by his father's broken English and heavy accent. Hollywood demanded that Martin shed his ethnic identity completely. The studios encouraged him to downplay his Italian heritage, fearing it would typecast him as a gangster or working-class character. So, Dano Crocetti became Dean Martin, adopting an effortless American charm that masked his immigrant roots. What made Martin's reinvention particularly poignant was his relationship with his parents. As his fame grew, he distanced himself from his family's traditions and language. He rarely spoke Italian publicly, though he remained fluent. His parents were proud but confused by their son's transformation. They had worked their whole lives so he could have opportunities, but success meant he had to reject the very culture that shaped him. Martin's partnership with Jerry Lewis made him a household name. But it was his solo career that cemented his status as a symbol of American sophistication. Yet behind the smooth exterior was someone who never quite reconciled his two identities. Friends noted that in private moments, traces of Dino would emerge in his loyalty to old friends, his love of Italian food, and his fierce protection of family. The irony wasn't lost on those who knew him. Dean Martin became famous for appearing effortlessly American while working incredibly hard to hide the Italian immigrant story that was in many ways the most American story of all, Hedy Lamarr. By day, she dazzled as one of Hollywood's most glamorous stars. By night, she was a brilliant inventor working on technology that would eventually help create Wi-Fi. GPS and Bluetooth, Hedy Lamarr lived one of the most extraordinary double lives in entertainment history. But the world only wanted to see half of who she was. Born Hedwig Eva Maria Kiesler in Vienna in 1914, she was the daughter of a successful bank director. Her early life was marked by both privilege and danger. As a Jewish family in Austria, they watched the rise of Nazi power with growing alarm. Hedwig's first marriage at 18 to arms manufacturer Friedrich Mandel was initially seen as a good match, but Mandel's ties to the Nazi regime and his controlling nature turned the marriage into a prison. Lamarr's escape from her first husband reads like a thriller. She reportedly disguised herself as her own maid to flee their mansion, making her way to London and eventually to Hollywood. This dramatic reinvention wasn't just personal. It was literal survival, as staying in Nazi-occupied Austria could have meant grave danger. In Hollywood, Hedwig Kiesler became Hedy Lamarr, named after silent film star Barbara Lamarr. Studios marketed her as the most beautiful woman in the world, but they had no interest in her mind. What they didn't know was that Lamarr spent her evenings in her trailer working on inventions. The frustration of being valued only for her appearance was constant. Lamarr later said, "Any girl can be glamorous. All you have to do is stand still and look stupid." She was brilliant, multilingual, and innovative, but Hollywood insisted on seeing her as merely decorative. Her attempts to discuss her inventions were dismissed as publicity stunts or eccentricity. During World War II, Lamarr and composer George Antheil developed a frequency-hopping communication system to prevent the jamming of torpedo guidance systems. The U.S. Navy initially dismissed their patent as impractical, not taking it seriously until decades later when it became foundational technology for modern wireless communication. Hedy Lamarr's dual identity, glamorous actress and visionary inventor, challenges every assumption about Golden Age Hollywood stars. She proved that behind carefully constructed facades often lay minds far more complex and valuable than the industry ever. Errol Flynn. Flynn spun a tale fit for the silver screen. An aristocratic adventurer who wrestled crocodiles, struck gold in Papua New Guinea, and lived on the edge. But the truth far less cinematic. Born in 1909 in Tasmania, Flynn wasn't the son of nobility, but of a respected biology professor. His mother's lineage was less documented, though not quite the mystery he suggested. Expelled from multiple schools, including Sydney's Shore School, he had a reputation for mischief and possibly theft. Flynn's reckless lifestyle wasn't just an act, it was self-destruction in slow motion. His battles with alcoholism began early and never truly ended. Friends described someone running from his own demons, using charm and bravado to mask deep insecurities. His excessive drinking and experimentation with substances took a devastating toll. When he passed away at 50, his body showed the wear of a 75-year-old person. Before Hollywood, Flynn painted himself as a soldier of fortune, a daring prospector, and a fearless plantation overseer. He did spend time in Papua New Guinea, but records suggest his work was more routine. Some clerical duties, minor law enforcement, and a stint in mining. As for the infamous crocodile duel, he later admitted it was a stage stunt designed to impress the right people in Tinseltown. Warner Brothers didn't just seize on his wild persona, they built it into legend. Cast in Captain Blood in 1935 and The Adventures of Robin Hood in 1938, Flynn became Hollywood's ultimate swashbuckler. Off-screen, his reckless lifestyle only fueled the myth. But by the 1950s, cracks in his carefully crafted image began to show. His posthumous autobiography, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, published in 1959, laid bare the embellishments. He confessed to a lifelong rebellion against authority, admitting that fame and fortune didn't bring the fulfillment he expected. By then, it didn't matter. The world had already bought the legend. Flynn proved that in Hollywood, the right story isn't just powerful, it's everything. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift represented a new kind of leading man. Sensitive, introspective, and emotionally vulnerable. But the intensity he brought to his performances came from a very real struggle with identity and belonging in an industry that demanded its stars fit rigid masculine ideals. Born into a wealthy family in 1920, Clift seemed destined for success, yet beneath his privileged exterior lay deep insecurities about his sexuality and his place in Hollywood's heteronormative culture. Unlike many of his contemporaries who hid their orientation behind studio-arranged marriages, Clift chose a different path. He simply remained perpetually single, fueling speculation while never confirming or denying rumors about his personal life. The turning point came in 1956 when Clift crashed his car after leaving a party at Elizabeth Taylor's house. The accident shattered his face and required extensive reconstructive surgery. Taylor, who rushed to the scene, reportedly reached into his mouth to pull out broken teeth that were choking him, potentially saving his life. The accident left Clift with chronic pain and a partially paralyzed face, but more devastatingly, it destroyed his confidence in his appearance. The very thing that had made him a star. The post-accident years were marked by increasing dependence on painkillers and alcohol. His later performances, while still powerful, carried the weight of his suffering. Directors noted that he could no longer move his face fully, forcing him to convey emotion through his eyes alone, which tragically made his performances even more haunting. Clift's story represents the cost of authenticity in a fabricated industry. While other stars hid behind carefully constructed personas, Clift's refusal to completely mask his true self made him both a revolutionary performer and a cautionary tale about Hollywood's treatment of those who wouldn't conform. Greer Garson. She possessed the grace of royalty, the diction of an aristocrat, and the kind of Hollywood mystique that made audiences believe she was born for the screen. But Greer Garson's polished image wasn't just a product of talent. It was a carefully crafted illusion right down to her supposed Irish roots. For years, MGM's publicity machine insisted Garson hailed from County Down, Ireland, weaving a tale of noble lineage that even linked her to the legendary Scottish outlaw, Rob Roy McGregor. A 1942 New York Times article described her as an Irish-born descendant of Rob Roy, a claim that only added to her aura of refinement. But there was just one problem. It wasn't true. Garson was actually born in London in Manor Park, East Ham, on September 29, 1904. Her father was a commercial clerk, her upbringing solidly middle-class, hardly the aristocratic origins Hollywood wanted to sell. So the studio leaned into the myth, even peppering her backstory with references to Celtic mythology. One particularly dubious claim suggested that Greer, a name tied to ancient Ireland, meant the most beautiful woman in the world. In reality, Greer was a goddess of sovereignty, not a beauty title. Garson herself played along, reinforcing the fantasy in interviews. In a 1941 photoplay feature, she wistfully recalled summers spent escaping back to Ireland for heavenly long visits. The implication, deep Irish roots. The reality, there's little evidence she spent much time there at all. But the deception worked. Hollywood audiences embraced her as the dignified British heroine, and her Oscar-winning role in Mrs. Miniver, 1942, cemented her status as the face of wartime resilience, even as whispers of her true birthplace surfaced later in her career. She never publicly corrected the record. Her birth certificate confirming her London origins only became widely known after she passed away in 1996. Was this all MGM's doing? Or did Garson knowingly shape her own myth? Either way, by the time the truth came out, it didn't matter. She had already secured her legacy as one of the Golden Age most distinguished stars. Tab Hunter. Tab Hunter was the ultimate Hollywood heartthrob. Blonde, blue-eyed, and every studio executive's dream. But his all-American image was completely manufactured. Born Arthur Andrew Kelm in 1931, he was a quiet, artistic kid who loved figure skating more than football. That didn't fit the rugged leading man mold, so his agent Henry Wilson, the same person who sculpted Rock Hudson's career, gave him a new name and a new persona. Suddenly he was Tab Hunter, the idealized picture of 1950s masculinity. But the reinvention didn't stop there. Warner Brothers carefully orchestrated his public life, pairing him with starlets like Natalie Wood and Debbie Reynolds for high-profile romances that existed only in the pages of gossip magazines. Behind the scenes, Hunter lived in fear. In an era where being outed could end a career overnight, he had to play the part both on and off-screen. Then came Confidential magazine, a tabloid notorious for exposing Hollywood's deepest secrets. They had dirt on Hunter, and rumors suggest Warner Brothers struck a deal to keep it buried. Whether that's true or not, the damage was done. His career cooled, and by the late 1950s, he was being edged out by a new generation of stars. Decades later, Hunter took back his story. In 2005, he released his autobiography, Tab Hunter Confidential, where he finally spoke openly about his life and the industry's suffocating expectations. His story wasn't just about reinvention. It was about survival in a Hollywood that demanded its stars be anything but themselves. Paul Mooney. Paul Mooney didn't just act. He vanished into his roles. But before he became Hollywood's master of transformation, he had to reinvent himself. Born Melmir Wiesenfreund in what's now Ukraine, Mooney faced an industry that favored assimilation, so he reshaped his identity, adopting the stage name Paul Munn and letting studios present him as a Chicagoan classically trained actor despite his true roots in Yiddish theater. Back then, Jewish performers often downplayed their heritage to land leading roles, and Mooney was no exception. His obsession with transformation extended beyond his personal story. He meticulously studied dialects, altered his physicality, and applied elaborate makeup to disappear into characters. Sometimes Hollywood found his dedication frustrating. Studio executives grumbled that he was unrecognizable from one role to the next, but that commitment paid off. In 1936, he won an Oscar for the story of Louis Pasteur, a role he personally fought for, proving he had the power to defy studio expectations. Despite his Hollywood reinvention, Mooney never fully abandoned his theatrical roots. In 1955, he returned to the stage and won a Tony for Inherit the Wind, a nod to the world where he first honed his craft. His story is a testament to the sacrifices actors made to fit into Hollywood's golden age and the lengths they went to in order to stand out. These 19 stars remind us that Hollywood's golden age was built on more than just talent. It was built on transformation, reinvention, and sometimes heartbreaking deception. While we celebrate their performances today, we should also remember the personal costs of conforming to an industry that demanded perfection at any price. If you enjoyed uncovering these hidden histories, please give this video a like and subscribe for more stories from Hollywood's past. And remember, behind every legend, there's always a human story waiting to be told. Thanks for watching.